Welcome back to the SEO Weekly, where queries are weird, advice is controversial, and everything depends. I'm your host, Garrett Sussman of iPullrank, and this week we're going to dive into all the sneak peek updates that occurred at Search On, Google's second annual event, where they give us a peek into what's coming up with search, with MUM, with e-commerce, with local, all this crazy good stuff. We're going to dive into, speaking of local, Whitespark Search Summit and all of the great panels that happened there. We're going to talk a little bit about delicious breadcrumbs and so much more. Let's dive in. On Wednesday, Google hosted their second annual Search On, which was a 1-hour presentation where they did a bit of a deep dive into some of the various search features and products that they're working on. It's really important to pay attention to because this stuff is going to be rolled out in the next few months and it can potentially have a massive impact on SEO. The first part that they talked about was how AI impacts search and how they're using MUM, the multitask unified model, which is a much more advanced, complex version of BERT in essence, that takes a variety of different contexts to provide better results. So for instance, if you don't have the right words, or if you want to search visually and just take a picture of something to solve a problem, MUM is going to help you do that. In fact, they showed a couple of examples which I thought were really cool. For instance, say you have this shirt with this really nice pattern on it, floral, going bohemian, and you want it as a sock, but you're not getting the results that you want. Well, you can now use Google Lens. Yeah, that's right. Lens, which has already been existing on mobile phones, is going to be able to be used not through your camera, but on the actual page to identify the image, pull out the pattern of that shirt, and then you'll be able to ask questions saying like, do you have a version of this pattern on a sock? And then Google's going to deliver you a whole variety of socks with similar patterns. Very complicated, very cool. Another example that they had was, say you have a broken bike and you want to fix it, but you don't know what the part is called. You have no idea how to even get started. And instead of searching through a whole ton of YouTube tutorials trying to figure out like what you're even trying to fix, you can use Google Lens on the page, and then Google would present to you like the tutorial of how to fix that thingamajig. That's going to be huge. Now, I'm a little skeptical on the adoption rate of how quickly people use image search to, have a better experience. Voice search adoption took some time, but people are using it now. But this could be huge, and this is rolling out in the next few months, and you are going to see Google Lens on desktop Chrome as well, which is pretty cool. For video, just in time for Halloween, Google's getting a little creepy where they're taking all of your, video visuals and the audio and intuiting some related searches that are going to be really helpful. So in this example, they use the macaroni penguin. There's a whole video about everything that's going on in the life of the macaroni penguin, but they never actually say like the macaroni penguin's life story. But here you can see on the bottom of related searches, macaroni penguin's life story is popping up as something that you can search. So this is just part of Google's initiative to help you deeper dive and find things that you didn't necessarily even know that you were searching for, or that is better articulated than the way that you initially made the query. The second big thing that Google talked about in the OnSearch presentation was, fake news. And how do we know that the sources of the information are credible? Well, Google's taking it really seriously, and what they're doing is they're adding helpful search tools to evaluate information online. And they're gonna do this in 3 ways, where they have this kind of informational link to pop up about this page. And the about this page stuff is gonna tell you, to see more information about the source of, the article. So in this example of the Motley Fool, is the Motley Fool a reliable investing financial advice type of publication? Find what others on the web have said about the site. So this kind of plays into EAT, like signals, expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness. How trustworthy is the site based on what other people are saying? So you can see for yourself what other people are saying, and Google will surface that. And then finally, learning more about the topic, which I could see in the SEO world might be frustrating if they're providing other sources from competitors about that topic, and it is a rabbit hole. But Google's purpose is to give you the most helpful and credible information. So these three aspects of the About This Page modal that'll pop up will be able to help you more confidently decide whether whatever you're looking at is credible, reliable information. The second part of the reliable information and fact checking is the fact that sometimes, especially for news sites, when real world events are happening in the moment, it can take a little time to get accurate information. And that's when a lot of rumors or falsities or just made up crap is thrown on the web. Well, Google is now going to kind of take a pause, say, slow your roll, and just say that, relative information simply doesn't exist yet. They're gonna have, these badges. They've already been testing this out, as they test out with all this stuff before they roll any of it out. But the point is to stop some of that, fabricated rumors, gossip, all that happen before it starts, at least in terms of the search results. Next up for the search on event, e-commerce. Google has been doubling down. Maybe it took them a while to get e-commerce right, but I think they're really starting to ramp up and try to become a major Amazon competitor when it comes to searching for e-commerce products. How did they do that? Well, ahead of OnSearch, they actually launched a best practices for e-commerce websites and products on their devs page, which is a series of like 7 or 8 articles that are insanely helpful when it comes to making sure that Google has all the information you need for your products to show up in organic search or in shopping or any of the places that people might be looking for your products via a Google product. So what do those best practice pages look like? Well, naturally, it's where you can show up. It's how to provide Google, the information about your products, whether it's through the Google Merchant Store or best practices around using e-commerce structured data. They also talked about how to launch a new e-commerce website. So for instance, if you're doing a soft launch where you're launching everything, you want to get it indexed on Google, but you're not marketing it yet. Maybe what you're doing is you want to do a grand launch right all at the same moment. The only con with that is that, Google won't have that indexed right away. So it might take some time for people to find you online. Or you could do, the type of thing where you have no products available. You put your site up, everyone can see everything, but they can't order yet, but then you are getting indexed by Google. They do all these pros and cons on the page that are pretty cool of why you would want to decide to go a certain strategy with launching an e-commerce store. They talked a bit about best practices when it comes to the URL structure for e-commerce sites. When you have hundreds or thousands of different products with thousands more variations, everything can get complicated with how you do the URL, whether you're doing it like based on a SKU or whether you're doing it based on some parameter that's added at the end of a category page. So they actually provide what they recommend that you should do if you want to show a URL for a blue shirt versus a green shirt, and how Google would take that into consideration. And then also just generally how Google understands your e-commerce site structure. So best practices around that. And then what a lot of SEOs have been wanting for a while is clarification on pagination best practices, incremental page loading, and all of their impact on Google search. The other thing, kind of tying it back to visual search and the Google Lens, is Google is adding a lot more features and functionality to Google Lens, in the sense that if you're looking at a website and you see a picture on, some clothing website or on Pinterest, and you really want to get it, but you don't know how to actually find that product, you'll more effectively be able to use Google Lens that can take you to that product anywhere on the web. It's just better functionality. It's more effective. They're really upping their game with visual search. And speaking of, they are actually building out the way that you're going to see visual search in general. The search engine results page are going to continue to pull in rich media wherever it can. And this is where it goes back to how it fundamentally might actually impact your SEO. We're going to see a lot more visuals kind of floating to the top of the search results. They're changing up the search results in general to think about if you're looking for your high level head terms, say acrylic paints or baseball. Search intent is really hard to figure out. And so they're trying to address this idea of fragmented search intent, where your query, what you're put in, can be for a number of different things by trying to almost guide you in certain directions. So as opposed to all just answering ambiguously, it's almost going to have this hierarchy of what you could be meaning when you put in a vague intent, and it's going to try and drive you down with a variety of different pills and topics that you can click on that takes you deeper into that category. The impact of that for SEO is potentially going to be massive, because in some ways, cannibalization, where you have duplicate content that's competing on the same SERP, might be more of a goal for SEOs, because if you see that that head term is going to try to address all the different SERP intents, the search intents, then you're going to want to have content for each of those search intents. So maybe you do want to rank, 7 times on the same page. It's going to be interesting to see if Google decides that, it all can come from the same source, where historically they've tried to avoid that, if it's the best answer on the page, or if they are going to, allow you to have one person dominate the SERPs if they've nailed it for every single search intent. It's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. Remember in past episodes how anything that John Mueller says really can influence our community? Well, he did a little clarifying through office hours last week, in which for the longest time, there's been this concept that there are 200 search ranking signals that impact what shows up the highest on search results. Well, he wanted to clarify that we're trying to move away from using that specific 200 number, or any number for that matter, because the way algorithms work and all the algorithms working together is it's so nuanced that it's not just one specific factor. And also presenting it as 200 factors or any number is misleading, because as Mike King's done in a past webinar talking about technical content optimization, there's a variety of different weighting to each factor anyway. So just talking about it as singular factors in a numerical sense doesn't really help anyone when it comes to SEO. There isn't one factor is the most important, and it's always changing anyway. Last week on Twitter, there was a really awesome thread by Claudio Eduardo Cabrera, who does SEO for the New York Times. He was talking about this theme around in the SEO community where we always talk about our wins, but very, very rarely talk about our failures. He actually broke down in this thread his experience working in the newsroom and how sometimes decisions are on him for when to run a story or how to run a story, whether, there's something politics related that needs to go in, have its own section, or if it needs to go in a roundup, and how that can ultimately lead to losses that you should be held accountable for. And it was really cool to see him take a responsibility for those choices and how he communicated with his team the thought process that went into the decisions and how that impacted the results, and how that is a really great form of leadership, to be transparent with the people that you work with whenever you can. Ultimately, people will respect you for it. It's scary to be wrong, but Google is hard. Nobody has all the definitive answers, and we go and we try to do our best, and we have sound reasoning behind our decisions, but that doesn't mean we always get it right. And sometimes you just know you can do better. So check out that Twitter feed by Claudio. It's a really great read. And then earlier this week was the Whitespark Local Search Summit, which is an incredible event that's been put on the last few years by Darren Shaw of Whitespark, which does listings management, very local SEO focused. However, not only has Darren done an incredible job of finding a diverse range of panelists from all genders and ethnicities and perspectives and ages, and it was really cool. He also found a lot of topics that weren't just local SEO or might apply to local SEO, but also applies to the greater universal SEO. And so some of the ones that I just wanted to highlight that I think are worth checking out are Diversity and Inclusion in Digital Marketing by Arija Buwali, Shani Gwynn, and Rejoice Ojiaku. Getting Started in E-Commerce, Key Lessons from Brands That Pivot was a talk by Kevin Capizzi. How to Boost Organic Traffic That Converts Using Featured Snippets by Himani Kankaria. Automation in SEO, Time Savers for the Busy Search Marketer by Nadia Emelech, and Visual Hacks to Improve On-Page Optimization by Nadia Koja. Really cool, just like general SEO topics that are worth checking out. While the free version of the event is over, you can get the replays via VIP. Just check out the link in the description to that. Okay, and in controversial advice, we're talking LSI keywords. There was a little bit of a brouhaha on Twitter a week ago about using LSI keywords for SEO. Brian Harnish and actually Bill Slawski did a couple of interesting articles just kind of bringing up why this whole term about latent semantic indexing keywords, LSI keywords, are very problematic. Now, I think on the one hand, it's dramatic, when there's all pile-on for someone using the term LSI keywords as saying that you're selling snake oil and, SEO BS. Ultimately, LSI keywords were created pre the internet in Bell Labs, patented as this way to take a static document and pull out, in essence, keywords that had semantic synonyms to the target keyword of a document. It really wasn't even used for the web. There's some websites out there that promise they'll deliver you a whole list of LSI keywords and that Google uses these LSI keywords for rankings. Well, that's not the case. Does Google use synonyms and co-occurrence of similar types of keywords in order to influence whether a page is relevant to the query? Absolutely. Is it via LSI keywords? Definitely not. So it's really a semantic term of not using LSI keywords because LSI is a real thing. It's not used by Google. It never has been. And when people use that term, it's potentially misleading. I don't think it's as big a deal as the whole shitstorm that blew up, excuse my French, on the internet, but it's worth paying attention to. And when someone brings up LSI keywords, you can watch this video by Brian, read the article by Bill, and get a sense as to why it is problematic. Talking about ranking factors, which we're not numbering anymore, Search Engine Journal has this cool series where they're going through, different potential ranking factors and trying to figure out whether, in fact, they are or not a ranking factor. Well, Angel Nino Franco did a really cool one on breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are the little site hierarchy links that you put in your website. Talked about it last week from Christina Zarenko's eCommerce Twitter thread that points you back to deep dives into subcategories, but also points back to the head categories, the parent topic levels. So it's a great experience for users, basically being able to get back to where they wanted to. It helps on search results because sometimes Google will now surface those breadcrumbs within the actual visuals of search results. Angel found it inconclusive, like it's possibly a ranking factor on both sides of the coin. You've seen examples from her article of why it wouldn't be and why it would. So not definitively, but from a user experience perspective and the way it probably does help internal linking in terms of being able to set anchor text that does provide link equity, the value of your links across your whole site. Breadcrumbs are a really good idea and they're considered a best practice across the industry. And finally, diving into Bill Slawski's SEO by the Sea, he looks at these patents and he just identifies some really cool potential stuff that Google's doing. Just because they patent something doesn't mean they're going to use it in search. But he did rewritten queries and user-specific knowledge graphs. And in this article, he dives into some of the patents of how Google could potentially use on your mobile devices, because we all search so much more from mobile these days, and there's so much more personalized information in terms of what you text on your phone and what you look at and other sensors and your location, to potentially take what you're asking of Google, take all of that context, full circle, and provide better results to your queries. So almost a potentially more personalized search result based on the device that you're using and based on your user-specific knowledge graph. So this user-specific knowledge graph is this idea that Google would be able to pick on, without displaying, keeping it private, all of your personal interactions with your device and your personal, data that you've shared to provide a better search experience. Ultimately, and therefore your device has better information than like server side, like on the client side, it has all that info. So why not find a way to use that information and provide a better searching experience? I just think it opens up some really interesting philosophical approaches to SEO and the way that we value rankings, especially if ultimately this is implemented and we get very, even more personalized search results. How does that impact the way we rank our SEO performance and how we as businesses and SEOs think about what's working and what's not when it's that much harder to generalize across a broad audience when everyone's search results are different? Well, this has been Google and philosophically heavy this week on the SEO Weekly. I think it's been really interesting to think about the direction of search and the impact of all these new technologies that are being rolled out via the OnSearch presentation, as well as e-commerce, buy, sell. No, but Google is focusing on e-commerce and it's an opportunity for SEOs. I think it's been fun. I'd love to hear what you think are the implications for all of this OnSearch, visual search, stuff. Leave a note in the comments. Please subscribe to the channel, like us, share us on social. My name is Garrett Sussman. I'm the Demand Generation Manager at iPullrank. This has been the SEO Weekly. We'll catch you next week.